Hello, Tony Jones, live from Melbourne. Tonight on Q&A, Karen Phelps, Lyle Shelton, Anna Burke, Bruce Bilson and Michele Levine. Safer schools or transgender activism? How an anti-bullying program opened a new front in the culture wars. We'll be back in just a minute. Good evening and welcome to Q&A live from the very lively Dockland studios in Melbourne. I'm Tony Jones, here to answer your questions tonight. Former President of the Australian Medical Association, Dr. Karen Phelps, the Managing Director of the Australian Christian Lobby, Lyle Shelton, the Labor Speaker who brought the House to order between Peter Slipper and Bronwyn Bishop, Anna Burke, the former Minister for Small Business, Bruce Bilson, and the Chief Executive of Roy Morgan Research, Michele Levine. Please welcome our panel. Well, earlier today we polled our Facebook followers. They want tonight's Q&A to discuss the Safe Schools program, marriage equality and Malcolm Turnbull's leadership. Well, let's go straight to those topics and our first question, which comes from Chella White.
I've taken my children out of Frankston High School because of the content of the Safe Schools Coalition program. I have no religious affiliation, but I believe it is biology that defines what sex you are, not radical gender theory. I did not feel comfortable with my daughter sharing restrooms or PE change rooms with the boys who wished to identify as girls and withdrew her enrolment into Year 7 this year. Are my concerns legitimate?
Michele, does public opinion tell us anything about the broad view of these programs?
Yes, look, I think public opinion is telling us quite clearly. Roy Morgan's been surveying how people feel about these broad issues for many, many years. And as a nation, we're changing. As a nation, we're becoming much more open-minded about people's sexuality. There's now majority support for gay couples adopting children. So, 20 years ago, that was a very minority view. Now, it's the majority. So as a nation, we're becoming a lot more open-minded. I think one of the things that goes with that, though, is any parent has to choose what's right for their child. So if they feel uncomfortable, and, the data also shows us that 20% of people believe that homosexuality is immoral. So people who have those views are bound to feel uncomfortable. They have choices. But I think as a nation, we are becoming much more open to all of these things, and I look forward to and I expect to see a day when this won't be needed, when these children will just be, just like any other child. And I think we've seen that. We saw when the young Italians and Greeks came when I was at school, they had real difficulties because they were different, they were other, and they were bullied. Wouldn't it have been great if the teachers actually knew how to handle that phenomenon? And over time, there are always people who are different. My children were in a program where there was a deaf program and there was an outrage. Why should why should our children have to be in a classroom with a deaf child who's going to take all of the attention? There's always another side to it. But I think society is moving in a way that we'll see this as a very natural progression and it won't even be needed, hopefully.
Thank you. Let's move to a different aspect of this debate. The next question comes from Janet White.
Thanks, Tony. In 2013, our Prime Minister, Julia Gillard at the time, delivered the national apology for forced adoption, saying at that time that government policy, bureaucracy and institutions had broken the most primal and sacred bond there is between a mother and a baby. In 2016, we're looking at coming to a national plebiscite on same-sex marriage, and in doing so we're being asked to establish another policy which breaks that bond. If we in fact allow two men the right to marry, we deliberately establish motherless families in an ideal in our law, as an ideal in our law. How can this policy be right when the last policy was wrong?
Michele Levine, I'll bring you in first.
Okay. So as I said, Australians are becoming much more open in their views about these things. Today, 76% of people say that gay people should be allowed to marry. Only in 2011, that was 68%. But clearly, this is a very strong majority of people hold that view. Those people who are against gay people marrying or marriage equality, and we wouldn't ask the question marriage equality because people wouldn't understand necessarily what that meant. That's a term that's coined. But those people who are against gay people being able to marry are predominantly concerned about the word marriage. So they're very happy for them to live together, to have the same rights as any other married couple. But there's a thing about marriage. Some of them are concerned about the religious aspects of it. So they're just, it's my religion. It's those sorts of things. A small proportion are just so homophobic that anything to do with gay people sends shivers up their spine.
Michele, what about the very specifics of the question was about children? It was particularly about, two men in a gay relationship bringing up children, but you can broaden it out because there's a general argument about children. Does the polling tell you anything about that?
Yep.
The views on that?
So 63% of people, that's 2/3 of Australians, say homosexual couples should be allowed to adopt children. So this is whether they're married or not. The majority of Australians have moved towards accepting this point of view. And obviously it's not across the board. I mean, it's very interesting. It's a political hot potato because Green supporters are much more likely to believe that homosexual couples should adopt children. Labor supporters are more likely. Liberal National Party supporters, no, just under 50%. So here's where you find something that becomes political. But overall, there is a move towards this kind of acceptance. And can I say about gay people being able to get married, there were a few people that raised issues about the children, but not very many. And I personally don't think that you can equate taking children from their parents with something like gay couples being able to marry and have children. It just doesn't make
Wilson,
sense.
we heard that eloquently. On your side of politics, has your government even come up with a question that would be asked in the plebiscite?
Well, there's a time frame and there's some clarity around...
Some time after the next election is a time frame.
That's right. You're very perceptive, Tony. I give you great credit for following that.
After you've gone.
That's an insightful observation you've shared with the audience. But that's on track, and that's a commitment that's made, and that's a commitment that will be honoured.
Okay, I'll tell you what, we're going to. I will bring you in, but I just want to get another question, same subject, and it's relevant to hear from both of these perspectives. From Georgia Weymouth Large, then we'll hear from the other side of the panel.
Thank you. I come from a same-sex parented family. I live with my younger brother and my two mums who have been together for 32 years now. The proposed plebiscite has the potential to cause a great deal of harm to families like mine and the LGBTQI+ community. A public debate will give the religious right an excuse to attack and degrade our families. I want to ask the panel how this plebiscite can be justified, not only given its enormous expense, but more importantly, given the harm that it'll do to many, many people.
My friends that are same-sex and in relationships, they've found love, and I'm thrilled for them. That is a terrific
And if they want to get
gift.
married, they don't have the choice.
And if they were looking for a way of having formal recognition and a public declaration of their commitment to each other, that machinery isn't that flash now. And we can improve that. We can improve that. But the title and the identity given to that relationship, in my mind, doesn't diminish the quality of the relationship. But it is something we need to work on. And I thought there was a way forward, but that was not found to be satisfactory. And now here we are on something of such strong opinions held quite diametrically. We're saying to the Australian community, well, here's your opportunity.
The Australian community,
that,
76% of the Australian community are saying that they believe that marriage equality should go forward, and at the moment our parliament is not reflecting the will of the Australian people.
But the issue that we need to turn our mind to as well is that we were having a discussion earlier about people's journey through education, where they were on a different pathway, and they were feeling that wasn't being respected and validated. Now we're saying, well, a majority of people believe X, hang those who don't agree. I mean, that's a different kind of discrimination, a different kind of intolerance. I think we should find a pathway that's inclusive of those different types of relationships, celebrate them, hope they're durable and hope they can produce someone as special as Georgia. I mean, that's great, but that's the issue. How do we recognise and understand the identity issues that sit behind it and give proper respect to those relationships?
Michelle, I'll bring you in here. A brief answer if we can, because we've got another question we need to go to on this subject.
Georgia, I had not thought of the points that you made. I think they're really important. When we look at the data, as we've said, the vast majority of people support marriage equality or gay people being able to get married. Those who don't, many of them are simply misinformed. So many of them are actually not aware that there is already equality in terms of economics. Many of them are talking about concerns about children when in fact it has nothing to do with children. So, you know, what it's raising, what the point that you've made is to maybe look at the data and realise that in fact this misinformation could become a big problem, and you would have these issues being thrown around. And it is misinformation, it's just not factual. So probably what we do need to do is to talk more about the fact that it is just the marriage. It's not going to change anything economically. It's not going to change anything about children. And maybe we're just not ready. Maybe that's the point you're making for this next step. But I agree, something which actually gives voice to the strong but poorly informed views is probably not a good thing.
It's time for one last question. It's from Hamish Jones.
The Coalition's plan to prevent preference manipulating in the Senate will obviously help allow greater transparency to suitable candidate to be elected. But in saying that, shouldn't the idea of everyday Australians be involved in Australian politics be welcomed? And maybe preference harvesting is the only way these sort of people can enter the political arena to have their voice heard.
Michelle, what do you think about that?
Sorry, what was that?
It's about Senate reform, which will take away the possibility of certain people who entered the Senate entering the Senate in future Senates. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So preference harvesting. The question is essentially saying allowed ordinary Australians for the first time, people like Ricky Muir, to sort of end up in the Senate.
Look, can I just say, first of all, if an election were held today, Malcolm Turnbull would be returned, the LNP would be returned. And I think the real issues around this are that his party and he have been elected to do certain things and they're unable to do it. And I think that we can't have a situation where the party that's elected is unable to do what they've actually been elected to do. And that's what the Senate creates when you've got a Senate that simply stops things, and when you have a Senate that's not working to, I think one of you mentioned a process that we can actually rely on. Because you can see if it goes like that, we'll have another few months and then there'll be complaints that he hasn't done anything. But, you know, today, if an election were held, the Australian people still want Malcolm Turnbull and the LNP in government, so I think they should be allowed to govern and the Senate should be allowing them to do what they need to do.
So, Bruce, you think you'd be better off with the Greens and Nick Xenophon and whoever his senators are holding the balance of power?
Look, I think if we start anticipating what the electoral outcome is and then framing our discussion on that basis, we're going into murky territory. This is simply about letting the Australian voters know where their vote's going. It's not a complicated idea. I mean, the preference whisperers are very gifted and they're using the current system as they're able to do it. But to see a person elected to the Australian Senate with 1,500 first preference votes that wouldn't even get you elected in a ward election in a local council, and then hold up the trajectory of the nation, make it impossible to hold governments to account for their promises and the commitments and the outcome they delivered to our country. I think that's not good. Having people know where their vote's going, I think that is good. So I think there's a strong case for the reforms that are being put to the Parliament.
Anna Burke, Labor's rejecting those reforms.
We think there needs to be reforms, just not the ones on the table. And we thought that, you know, they should have gone further and there should have been some other changes made. A deal was done. It's going to get up. The government's going to get its way in the Senate. So there was no use us trying to negotiate. They weren't going to negotiate with us. Should we have greater representation? Yes, we should. Should we have, you know, fixed 4-year terms? Yes, we should. Should we have, you know, fixed Senate terms that aren't out of sync? Yeah, we should. Are you going to give it to us? No, you're not. You know, every time we have a referendum on these things, it goes down in a screaming heap. So we've got to have an actual open, honest discussion about what sort of government we want. I think Senate's important. And I think if the government of the day can't get it through the Senate, it's their own fault, because they haven't been able to sell what they want to those crossbenchers to get it through.
So bring on a double dissolution election and that solves the problem.
Well, my kids would be happy because I'm retiring too. So, you know, at a personal... I don't know. I'm very conflicted about a double dissolution. And I'm not sure the government's, you know, made a case for a trigger for any of those bills coming down. And for all of us to actually understand the process and what we're buying into is complicated. And I think we're about to have this sort of change, then we need a larger time frame to explain what you're actually going to be doing when you walk into that ballot box.
I'm told we've run out of time. I'm sorry about that. To the other panellists who might have wanted to jump in on that, that's all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel, Karen Phelps, Lyle Shelton, Anna Burke, Bruce Bilson and Michele Levine. Thank you. Thank you very much. You lively audience, you. Now, on next Monday, on the eve of International Women's Day, Q&A will be joined by the Minister for Employment and Women, Michaelia Cash, the Shadow Minister for Trade, Penny Wong, co-founder of Mamma Mia Women's Network, Mia Friedman, leading Australian broadcaster, possibly feminist, Alan Jones, and political satirist and commentator Josh Zepps. Until next week's Q&A, good night.